going on? I'm going to try and keep this hopefully clear and pretty concise. And so this is about philosophy, political philosophy, and, um, you know, there's a statement that I hope it opens a question set, right? And so um, the statement that I'm going to make is that anarchy is not a political or philosophical position. So anarchy is not a political or philosophical position. It can't be for some reason. And the points that I want to make, the way I'm going to go about talking about this is this position of fundamental or foundational political philosophy. And so what does this mean? This usually means is that when we're talking about someone like Hobbes and Locke, and I want to reference text a little bit, there's this base layer, and we want to sort of go below that. So, that's what we're talking about in terms of the philosophy. So, so this is how I see this: is if we take Hobbes's political philosophy and we say, we ask, is anarchy possible? What Hobbes tells us is that, the state of nature is anarchy. We don't talk about a law of nature. We don't talk about anything except human nature. And people create conflict. People try and better themselves, and they can dispense whatever justice they want. There is no justice. It's life in the state of nature is nasty, British, and short. So what we end up doing is electing a sovereign, a government. We agree to the social contract, whereby, because we're in this sort of precarious situation in the state of nature, we say, look, the one thing we know needs to be true is that people need to be safe. These are Hobbes's words. And so, and within this, and so this is what I think developed, and this is like the secondary historical reading of Hobbes as well, is what happens is you have this sovereign in this pre-liberal society. We talk about individuals, but it's still pre-liberal, where everyone has to be safe. And sort of above and around this, the sovereign still has absolute power. They can do anything they want. They control basically all the force in a society. But people are still people. There's still conversation. There's still dialogue. And so for Hobbes, what sort of happens is you always have this almost anarchic, realpolitik competition to some extent. Maybe it appeals to values. It doesn't really matter, though, right? There's nothing in a constitution that needs to be seriously about this, and people remain safe. And so, okay, we have this, right? Okay, and so for John Locke, this is a really different picture, right? And I'll come back to this and talk about anarchy in just a minute. But for John Locke, we have two things we talk about. We talk about natural law and natural rights. And so for John Locke, when we talk about, when we start talking about natural law, bad things happen all the time, right? This is our original position, our state of nature. Bad things definitely happen. People do bad things. And in the state of nature, people are more than happy to, they're more than capable of going and avenging themselves, seeking justice on their own, arbitrating a dispute. They can talk to someone else about arbitrating this dispute. There's informal mechanisms. There's no problem, right? And we still have this natural rights where we know something's wrong, right? This isn't based on nothing. And so this is sort of John Locke. And so what ends up happening when we get to government with Locke is all of this becomes so much more clear, so much more codified. And this is maybe like more advanced. This is something you talk about maybe in a survey course or something. If you're doing a political philosophy survey course, you are learning about John Locke, and you're saying, my gosh, I knew this when I was in the state of nature. I knew that I could cut down a tree and build a house, and that's my house. But now I really know that, right? When we talk about rights in the political sense, now I know that someone can't just take it away. There's an objective magistrate. We all know the laws. We know the rules. We know how a transaction works. You can't come to my house with a weapon and coerce me to do something. All this stuff, and without like the strict contractualism where it's like, that's coercion, and no one would ever have agreed to that. You just have that somewhere else, right? So John Locke's really simple. He clarifies a lot of this stuff. And so this is what I wanted to talk about. If, when anarchy isn't a political position, this is where I'm coming from, is that if we look at Hobbes, he says, well, whatever anarchy you talk about, it's not in a society. You don't have society if it's anarchy. It's anarchy. It's nasty, brutish, and short. And if you want to somehow imagine that this space in society can grow where there's dispute and all of a sudden we're not thinking about security, well, we already said that this isn't really relevant. We already said this can't happen, right? We said people aren't like this. We said there's always going to be this conflict. And the one goal of government, the whole reason that we got here in the first place is that, is that life is too harsh. So sure, you can have this real competition, Republicans arguing with Democrats, civil society, campaigners, all this other stuff. But you never can have or get to this point where anarchy is viable. Where did that even come from? No one should have ever come to that. Just because people are behaving nicely doesn't mean they always will. And for Locke, I think the conversation or exploration, whichever one you want to choose to use here, is even more interesting, right? It's even more, fascinating, right? That's what I believe. Because when we're talking about John Locke and his notion of civil rights, natural rights, or, natural rights and natural law, well, you never can even talk about anarchy. And this is what I think sort of, people can say, well, Hobbes was just wrong and all this other stuff. But with Locke, you don't have that backdrop anymore. Even though some people will say his political theory is too thin, it's too classical, maybe you're right, there's good reasons and philosophical structures elsewhere. But if you're talking to John Locke, he says, well, if you ask someone in the state of nature what anarchy is or what life is like, you don't get they'd say, what? You would never get that position of anarchy, because what they would say is that, well, if I cut down a tree and I make a house, that is property. That's my property. If I'm walking, you can't just come and hurt me, right? Like, what are we talking about here, And, if I'm with my family or something and, who knows, this is maybe like a feudal society and I'm somehow, off the land. There's some agreement or something of like a feudal lord and I'm with my family. Well, you can't just come here. The reason we agree to this is because that my family has these rights to their life and their freedom, right? You can't just go tell us what to do. There's some other reason that we have this, and if you want to violate that, if you want to break a natural law or something and deprive us of our right, well, then that's what we're talking about. That's not anarchy either. That's not anarchy. And so I hope this, if anyone's just interested in this stuff or in school, I hope this was sort of helpful. And so that's sort of the point I want to make, is that there is, first, I hope that statement, when you hear institutional philosophy, there's some people in some schools that are really interested in anarchism. It's taught, I think, a lot of places. You can find definitely, white papers and stuff. It's outside of contemporary political theory and stuff like that. Those courses, they might have a PDF or something, but it's not popular. But one of the reasons is because that from the traditional approach of political theorists and, what a lot of people arrive at in a conversation, not everyone, but philosophical or academic sense, even as far back as Hobbes and Locke, there are good reasons that people reading those books first and reading them at all should just take this idea of anarchy and realize, I can crumple this up and throw it out. Anarchy isn't a philosophical or political position because it's not about society, because it's not how the world works, and because anarchy always, if you have anarchy, it is because that there is a government or a system in place behind it. So it's just not possible. Yeah, and so that's the video, I think.